You people are all the same, clinging to what isn't yours, begging for scraps like it's charity. That was the first thing she heard when she sat down to eat with him. It was a rainy Thursday night in Savannah, Georgia. The kind of evening that soaked your coat through before you reached your car. The wind howled against the window panes of Marlowe's, an upscale seafood restaurant by the harbor. Inside, the air was warm, filled with the smell of buttered crab and old money. At the back of the dining room sat a frail white man. Alone. Table for one. Again. Alea was used to seeing him. He came in every other night. Ordered the same meal. A bowl of clam chowder and the cheapest red on the menu. Ate slowly. Always polite. Always quiet. Most guests never noticed him. But Alea did. She was a waitress. Black. Beautiful. 28. With soft curls pulled back in a bun and a figure that turned heads, even when dressed in a plain server's apron. But in a place like this, her presence was tolerated, not embraced. So when she grabbed a plate, clocked out, and sat across from that lonely old man to share her break, and her food, it wasn't long before the whispers started. Then came the voice. Sharp. Cold. Belonging to a woman in diamonds who'd never worked a day in her life. You people are all the same. Alea looked up. Eyes locked. But she didn't say a word. And that's when a phone came out. A teenage boy at the next table started filming. By morning, the clip would hit 100,000 views. By noon, it would be all over TikTok and Reddit, captioned, "Gold Digger Alert, Waitress targets elderly diner for clout." What they didn't know was everything. That elderly diner was Thomas Corwin, retired professor, widowed, and recently diagnosed with memory loss. But more importantly, he was the estranged father of Adam Corwin, CEO of EtherCore, a multi-billion-dollar tech company and one of Forbes' youngest billionaires. And Alea? She didn't know any of that. She only knew he looked lonely. What happened next? No one could have predicted. Not the customers. Not the manager. Not even Alea herself. This isn't just a viral clip. This is a black story that exposes what dignity really means, how compassion is mistaken for ambition, and why kindness is the loudest rebellion in a world that judges by surface. You're watching Hidden Worth. And what you're about to hear will stay with you. If this story speaks to something in you, don't forget to hit subscribe. We share real stories. Powerful stories. Stories like this one. Now, let's go back to where it all began. Alea never planned to be a waitress. She wanted to write. Not the kind of writing that fills blogs or sells clickbait headlines, but the kind that lives between the lines. Stories about people who get forgotten, overlooked, erased. People like her mother. People like her. But life had other plans. Plans that didn't care about dreams. She grew up in the east side of Atlanta, in a 2-bedroom apartment above a convenience store. Her mom, Naomi, worked 2 jobs, day shift cleaning houses and night shift at the hospital cafeteria. The scent of bleach and overcooked potatoes was what Alea associated with home. They never had much, but Naomi taught her to speak with her eyes, stand up straight, and never apologize for her skin. Still, it wasn't easy. In school, teachers praised her essays but gave her lower grades than her white classmates. When she asked why, one teacher leaned in and said, "You write well, for someone like you." That was 8th grade. She remembered that day like it was yesterday. Because that was the day she started hiding her voice, learning how to dim her brilliance just enough not to make others uncomfortable. She graduated high school with honors but no scholarship. Her mom had a stroke the same week college acceptance letters came in. So instead of moving into a dorm room, Alea took a job at a local diner. That was 6 years ago. Since then, she had worked every position the food industry could offer. Hostess, line cook, barista, cashier. The jobs changed. The uniforms changed. But the looks didn't. There was always that moment when a customer glanced up, saw her skin, and decided what kind of person she was. There was always that smile she had to wear just tight enough to seem polite, but not enough to be threatening. There were always the comments whispered just low enough to pretend they weren't meant to hurt. You got some attitude, huh? Smile more. You're too pretty to be mad. Did they hire you for diversity? Every shift was a masterclass in quiet endurance. By the time she got to Marlowe's, she was 28, emotionally exhausted but outwardly polished. The restaurant was high-end, oysters on ice, waiters in black ties, a wine list longer than most people's resumes. It wasn't a place that welcomed people like her. But she earned her spot. She remembered the interview. The manager barely looked at her resume. He looked at her skin, then said, "We usually go for a more classic look, but let's see how you perform." Alea knew what classic meant. Still, she showed up on time, learned the menu inside out, and handled difficult tables with a grace that came from years of swallowing pride. She was the first to arrive, the last to leave, and the only person who knew the dishwasher's name was Kenny and that he had 3 kids in South Carolina. Yet, she was invisible to most of the staff. Not because she wasn't good, but because she wasn't white. And still, she smiled. Not because it was required, but because it was survival. Because her mama taught her that sometimes the most revolutionary thing a black woman can do is exist. Fully, loudly, without apology. Alea didn't drink. Didn't party. Didn't post thirst traps or cry for attention. Her rebellion was kindness. Her protest was patience. On her break, she sat by herself. Wrote in a worn-out leather journal. Scribbled bits of dialogue, story ideas, titles she might one day use. She didn't share them with anyone. Not yet. She saved every dollar she could. Not just for rent or bills, but for that dream she still carried in her chest like a heartbeat she refused to silence. One day, she told herself, she'd go back to school. Finish what she started. Write a book so real it made people uncomfortable in the best way. But for now, she served crab legs and cocktails. And for some reason, she couldn't stop thinking about the old man in the corner booth. How his hands trembled when he lifted his spoon. How he stared at the window like it used to show him something worth remembering. She didn't know his name, but she recognized his loneliness. It mirrored her own. That night, she brought her lunch to his table. Not for attention. Not for a tip. Not to be a hero. She just didn't want to eat alone anymore. And neither did he. He always sat at table 14, right next to the window, near the exit. Quiet. Private. Close enough to feel like he belonged. Far enough not to be noticed. That was how Alea first remembered him. Not for his presence, but for how invisible he tried to be. The first night she noticed him, it was raining hard. Thunder rolled in off the coast and the power flickered more than once. Most diners came in groups, couples on dates, families celebrating birthdays, the usual chatter and clink of cutlery filling the air. But not him. He walked in, dripping wet, in a dark brown coat 2 sizes too large. His shoes were scuffed and the collar of his shirt was turned up, like he'd dressed in a rush, or maybe like he didn't care. Alea guessed he was somewhere near 70. His hair was white, but not clean-cut. His eyes, soft gray, carried the weight of someone who'd been tired for a long time. She brought him water before he asked. He smiled, a weak kind of smile, but sincere. He ordered clam chowder and a glass of house red. That was it. No appetizer. No dessert. And when the check came, he paid in cash. Exact change. The second night, he came back. Same table. Same order. Alea tried not to assume too much. Maybe he liked the view. Maybe the soup reminded him of something. But when it became a pattern, every other night, same time, same table, she got curious. Most of the staff didn't care. They called him the ghost behind his back. Some joked he might die mid-meal. Others thought he was a mystery novelist watching them for a story. One hostess even said he might be a millionaire in disguise, looking to leave a big tip to someone kind. But Alea didn't care about the stories. She cared that he always folded his napkin the same way. That he thanked her by name. that he never looked at his phone, just stared out the window like he was waiting for someone who never showed up. And she noticed something else. He never finished his food. Half the soup. Half the wine. Every time. As if he didn't want to take more than he deserved. One night, on her 15-minute break, she grabbed a plate of leftover staff pasta and walked over to his table. He looked up, surprised, then smiled. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. He nodded once, slowly. "I'd be honored." They sat in silence for a minute. The restaurant buzzed around them, but at that table, it felt like time slowed down. "I've seen you here before," she said. "And I've seen you," he replied. His voice was low, textured like gravel. "Always working. Always kind." She blushed a little. "You remember that?" "Hard not to," he said. "The world doesn't offer much kindness anymore. So when you see it, you don't forget it." They didn't exchange full names that night. Just talked. He told her he used to teach literature at a university. Loved poetry, especially the kind that made silence feel sacred. He recited a line from Robert Frost, something about two roads diverging in a wood, and she smiled because she remembered reading it in high school and hating it, but somehow, hearing it from him made it feel brand new. She told him about her journal. About her dream to write stories that mattered. About how life had a way of delaying things that felt urgent, only to replace them with things that felt impossible. He listened. Not like someone killing time, but like someone who'd waited years to hear a real voice again. That night, when her break ended, she stood up and thanked him for the company. "You saved me from another lonely meal," she joked. He looked up, eyes a little glassy. "No," he said softly. "You saved me." She didn't know what to say. So she just nodded, picked up her plate, and walked away. From that night on, every time he came in, she'd bring a second bowl of chowder. Sit with him for a few minutes, sometimes longer if the shift allowed it. They didn't always talk. But they always shared something. A story. A quote. A silence that said more than words. Other staff started whispering. The hostess rolled her eyes. The manager warned her to keep things professional. But Alea didn't care. Because something about this man, this quiet, mysterious stranger, felt like home. Not the physical kind, but the kind your soul recognizes before your brain catches up. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that he had a story too. And that story was about to change her life. By the third week, the staff stopped whispering. They had moved on to gossip about a couple getting divorced at table 6, or the influencer who left a 1-star review because her cocktail had too much ice. But Alea and the old man at table 14? That was just routine now. Except for them, it never felt routine. His name, she finally learned, was Thomas. No last name offered, and she didn't ask. She figured if it mattered, he'd tell her. He asked about her writing. Really asked. Not the fake kind of interest people show when they're trying to be polite. He wanted to know what made her write. What kinds of stories lived inside her. What she was afraid to say out loud. And she told him. About the time her English teacher accused her of plagiarizing her own poem because it was too advanced. About the way she rewrote real stories into fiction because reality felt too raw. About the characters she'd made up just to keep herself company when the world got too quiet. Thomas listened like every word mattered. Sometimes he responded with stories of his own. Not the kind with dates and names, but the kind that carried lessons. Like the time he read Hemingway aloud to a student who'd never heard a man cry before. Or the moment he realized that most people don't fear failure. They fear being seen trying. They shared food too. She'd sneak him half a slice of lemon tart when the kitchen overbaked one. He'd offer her bites of the homemade trail mix he kept in his coat pocket. Doctor's orders, he said. Supposed to help with memory. They made each other laugh. Thomas had a dry sense of humor, sly and understated. Alea teased him about his corduroy pants and old man cough. He joked that she was too wise for her own good, and threatened to make her his therapist. It wasn't just conversation. It was connection. And that connection grew in the quiet moments. Like when she'd walk past his table with a tray full of drinks, and he'd nod just once. Like when he started remembering tiny details about her life, her mother's name, the title of her unfinished short story, her dream of visiting New York just to sit in a crowded cafe and write until her wrist gave out. One rainy night, after most of the tables had cleared out, he looked at her and said, "You know, it's not just the food." "What isn't?" she asked. "This place," he said. "It's not the food that keeps me coming back. It's you." She didn't know what to say. So she smiled. That smile that tried to carry everything she couldn't put into words. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. It was creased and worn, like he'd been carrying it for years. "Open it when you're alone," he said. Later that night, after her shift ended and the street outside was quiet, Alea sat on the back steps near the dumpster where she usually took her breaks. She unfolded the paper. It was a poem. Handwritten. Faint pencil marks, shaky lines. Some meals are salt, others sugar. But the rarest are the ones that feed your soul. Served not on silver plates, but across from kind eyes. No signature. No explanation. Just that. The next time she saw him, she brought him a coffee from the shop down the street. Black, 1 sugar. Just how he liked it. "You remembered," he said, surprised. "I remember everything," she replied. But the truth was, she wished she didn't. Because even as this strange friendship blossomed into something warm and rare, she could feel the cold breath of reality creeping in. Not everyone in the restaurant approved. And not everyone was silent about it. One night, as she cleared a nearby table, a woman in pearls leaned over and whispered to her date, loud enough for Alea to hear. "She's smart," the woman said. "Knows where the money is. Poor old fool probably thinks she actually cares." Alea's hands tightened on the tray. Her smile didn't waver. But later, when she sat across from Thomas, she couldn't meet his eyes right away. He noticed. "They're wrong, you know," he said quietly. "I know," she whispered. "But sometimes I still feel like I have to prove it." "You don't," he replied. "Not to them. Not to me." And for the first time in a long time, she believed it. Not because he said it, but because when someone sees your soul and still chooses to sit with you, you stop needing anyone else's approval. What neither of them knew, sitting there in the soft glow of overhead lights, was that someone had been watching. Someone with a camera. Someone who would soon change everything. The day it all unraveled started like any other. The sun was high, the breeze off the river was light, and the dinner shift at Marlowe's was already fully booked with regulars and tourists. Alea showed up early, as always, hair pulled back, apron pressed, notebook tucked in her back pocket. Table 14 was set. Thomas hadn't been in for 3 nights now, and she tried not to let that worry her. Maybe the weather was too harsh. Maybe he was visiting someone. Maybe he just needed space. Still, she set the table like he was coming. Silver polished, napkin folded just the way he liked it. At 6:43 p.m., he walked through the door. Her heart eased the second she saw him. But he looked different. Slower. More fragile. His eyes were tired, his gait uneven. She rushed over, gently touched his elbow, and walked him to his usual seat. "I was starting to think you ran off on me," she teased softly. Thomas smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I forgot where I left my coat," he said, a little dazed. "It took me a few days to remember." She didn't push. She just brought him his usual, and when the moment came, she sat down for her break, across from him, like always. But tonight, they weren't alone. 2 tables over, a young couple watched them closely. The woman, early 30s, blonde, designer handbag in her lap. The man wore a Rolex that seemed to shout instead of tick. They whispered, snickered, and exchanged glances that made Alea's skin crawl. Then came the phone. The woman angled it discreetly, but not enough to hide her intentions. She began filming. Alea leaned in to Thomas. "They're recording us." Thomas turned, squinting. The woman didn't stop. Instead, she called out, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, "Smile for the camera, sweetheart. You're about to go viral." Several diners laughed. Alea's cheeks burned. She stood up. "Excuse me," she said, keeping her tone as level as she could. "Please don't film me or my guest." The woman smirked. "Public space, honey. You work here. You're the entertainment." That's when it happened. The manager, Greg, approached from across the room. Mid-40s, white, with a sharp part in his hair and a voice like stale bread. "Alea," he said sternly, "could I speak with you in the back?" She followed him to the kitchen, heart pounding. "You can't be sitting with guests during peak hours," he snapped. "It's my break," she replied, trying to keep calm. "And he's—" "I don't care if he's the Pope," Greg interrupted. "It's unprofessional. Guests are complaining. They think you're taking advantage of a vulnerable customer." Her breath caught. "Excuse me. You're being talked about online," he said, crossing his arms. "And not in a good way. People think it's a hustle, that you're working some angle." Alea stared at him, stunned. "I'm being kind," she said quietly. "You're being watched," he countered. "And we can't afford that kind of attention. So no more breaks at that table. Are we clear?" She wanted to scream, to remind him that she was the one picking up double shifts when others called out. That she knew the menu better than the chef. That for months, she had shown up, stayed quiet, and smiled while guests talked down to her like she was part of the furniture. But all she said was, "Clear." When she returned to the floor, Thomas was gone. A note lay folded neatly by the soup bowl. "I didn't mean to cause trouble. I won't come back. Thank you for everything. T." Alea held it in her hands like it might disappear if she blinked. At that moment, she wasn't just angry, she was heartbroken. Because she knew this wasn't about professionalism. It wasn't about policy. It was about perception. And the truth was, a young black woman sharing a table with an old white man didn't sit right with certain people's ideas of the world. They saw a threat, or a trick, or a scandal. But they didn't see kindness. They never did. That night, after her shift ended, she sat in the empty break room staring at the walls. She thought about all the times she'd let comments slide. About the laughter behind her back. About the phone recording her like she was a circus act. And for the first time in a long time, Alea didn't feel tired. She felt angry. Not just at the woman with the camera. Not just at Greg. But at the system that made her believe, even for a second, that her kindness was something to be ashamed of. Because it wasn't. And she was done pretending it was. The next day felt heavier. The kind of weight that sat on your chest before you even opened your eyes. Alea moved through her morning routine on autopilot. Coffee, shower, clean uniform, same shoes with the worn-out soles. But something was missing. Thomas. He hadn't come back. The dining room at Marlowe's felt colder without him. Even with the usual crowd, the laughter, the clinking glasses, the hum of conversation, it all felt empty. She walked past table 14 three times before finally admitting he wasn't coming. He meant what he wrote. And just like that, he was gone. Around 8:45 that night, right after the dinner rush had started to slow, one of the hostesses tapped her on the shoulder. "Hey, someone dropped this off for you." She held out a plain white envelope. No name on the front, no logo, just Alea, written in shaky handwriting. Her breath caught. It was Thomas's writing. She stepped outside, onto the quiet back patio where staff sometimes smoked or took 5-minute mental health breaks. She sat down on a bench beneath the string lights and opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a single sheet of stationery, lined, the kind old-school people still used, and something else, a check. Alea's eyes moved between the two. First, the note. "I don't have much time. My memory is slipping faster than I expected. You gave me something no one else did. Dignity. You looked me in the eye. You listened. And for those moments, I wasn't invisible. I was still a man. You didn't treat me like I was broken. You treated me like I still mattered. I don't know if I'll remember your name tomorrow, but tonight, I remember everything. Thank you. T. Alea blinked, trying to process the emotion tightening her throat. Then she looked at the check. $10,000. Pay to the order of Alea Bennett. Memo line. Keep writing. She stared at it like it couldn't possibly be real. The name on the check said, Thomas R. Corwin. She recognized the name. Finally, the last name. But why this? Why her? $10,000 wasn't billionaire money. It wasn't even life-changing money. But to her, it meant breathing room. It meant she could cut back a shift and start that community writing class downtown. It meant she could finally repair her car. Maybe even take her mom to that weekend retreat in Asheville she'd been dreaming about. She thought about walking straight into Greg's office and quitting right there on the spot. But she didn't. Not yet. She folded the check, tucked the note gently into her apron pocket, and stood there for a while under the stars, letting the silence fill her bones. There was no return address. No way to say thank you. No way to ask him what made him choose her, why he trusted her with this. But maybe, she already knew. Because kindness doesn't just vanish. It echoes. It leaves fingerprints on people's lives long after you've left the room. And in this case, it left an envelope. One that would change everything. It came on a Monday. Mondays were always quiet at Marlowe's. Fewer reservations, slower shifts. Alea was folding linen napkins near the bar when the call came in. One of the hosts answered, then looked across the room at her. His expression changed. He motioned her over with a hand that trembled slightly. Hey, he said gently. There's a call for you. From a nursing home. St. Matthew's. Alea's heart dipped. She took the phone, her hands damp with nerves. Miss Bennett? The voice on the other end asked. Yes, she replied, barely above a whisper. I'm sorry to inform you. Mr. Thomas Corwin passed away this morning. Peacefully. In his sleep. The words didn't register at first. Passed away. No. That couldn't be right. She had just seen him. 4 days ago? He was slower, yes, but still sharp. Still quoting poetry. Still drinking soup like it was a ritual. He listed you as his emergency contact, the woman continued. Alea blinked. What? He didn't have any family listed with us. But there was a note in his file. Said if anything happened, we should contact you. Silence. The kind that stretches until it hurts. They asked her if she'd like to claim any of his belongings. Said there wasn't much. Just a coat, a few books, and a worn-out satchel. She said yes. Of course yes. She finished her shift like a ghost. No one said anything. Maybe they sensed it. Maybe they didn't care. But when she walked out of Marlowe's that night, the world felt dimmer. She took an Uber to the nursing home. St. Matthew's was tucked between a strip mall and a quiet cemetery. Inside, the walls were beige and the air smelled like lemon disinfectant. A nurse with kind eyes handed her a small cardboard box. He talked about you, the nurse said, offering a sad smile. Said you were the only person who made him feel human. Alea clutched the box to her chest like it contained something sacred. And in a way, it did. Inside was his satchel, a paperback copy of Leaves of Grass, a half-empty bottle of memory supplements, and a worn photo, black and white, of a young man standing next to a boy no older than 10. On the back, Adam, age 10. Stanford visit. 1998. Her eyes paused. Adam. The name felt familiar, though she couldn't place it. She took the bus home that night. Sat in the last row, staring at the photo, trying to piece together a story she wasn't sure she was allowed to know. The next afternoon, just before her shift, a black car pulled up in front of Marlowe's. It wasn't flashy, but expensive in the quiet, powerful way. Out stepped a tall man in a dark gray suit, crisp shirt, loafers that cost more than her paycheck. He had the same eyes as Thomas, gray, sharp, piercing. He walked into the restaurant like he owned the air. "Can I help you?" Greg asked, walking up with his signature phony grin. "I'm looking for Alea Bennett." Greg hesitated. "She's busy right now. Can I ask what this is regarding?" "I'm Adam Corwin," the man said, his voice calm but laced with steel. "Thomas Corwin was my father." Greg froze. Alea, overhearing from the hallway, stepped out before anyone could stop her. "I'm Alea," she said, steady. Adam turned. For a moment, his eyes searched her face, like he was trying to read something only his father could have explained. "You knew him," he said. "I did," she replied. "He nodded once. He spoke about you. In his journals. In his letters." She blinked. "Letters?" Adam pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket and handed it to her. It was Thomas's handwriting again. "If you're reading this, Adam, it means I'm gone. And if you found Alea, it means you're finally listening." The letter went on, recounting the dinners, the stories, the way she treated him like a person when the world had already decided he didn't matter. Adam looked at her again. Longer this time. "I want to thank you," he said, voice low. "For being there. For treating him like he still counted." She nodded, unsure what to say. Then Adam turned to Greg. "I'm buying this building," he said flatly. "The whole block." Greg blinked. "Excuse me. I've already made the offer." "This restaurant? Done." "You can't." "I can." Adam cut him off. "And I will." He looked back at Alea. "My father didn't get kindness from many people at the end of his life. But he got it from you. That matters more to me than anything this restaurant ever served." And just like that, he turned and walked out. The silence he left behind was louder than anything Alea had ever heard. She looked down at the letter still in her hands, at the photo in her coat pocket. And for the first time in days, she smiled. By the end of the week, the sign on Marlowe's front door had changed. Closed for renovation, it read in clean, bold lettering. But everyone knew the truth. It wasn't coming back. Word spread fast through Savannah, like wildfire through dry grass. One day, the hottest restaurant on the waterfront was booked solid with reservations from socialites and CEOs. The next, its staff were packing up silverware in cardboard boxes, whispering in the walk-in cooler, wondering what the hell just happened. Greg, the manager, tried to act unfazed. But the panic in his eyes gave him away. He paced the dining room, phone pressed to his ear, muttering things like, "This is a mistake," and "You can't just terminate the lease." But nobody on the other end seemed to care. Because Adam Corwin had already bought the building. And not just Marlowe's. The entire strip of waterfront real estate, 6 lots, including the parking structure, 2 boutique stores, and a wine bar. He didn't threaten or negotiate. He simply made an offer too big to refuse. Quiet, quick, legal, powerful. By Friday, demolition permits were filed. By Saturday, the restaurant was dark. And by Sunday, the internet got the full story. The video. Not the one taken by the snide woman with the designer purse. That one had already been buried under other viral noise. This was different. A new clip surfaced, one no one had seen before. Footage from a security camera inside Marlowe's, quietly leaked online. It showed Alea sitting across from Thomas. No audio. No flashy edits. Just 2 people sharing soup and soft laughter across a small table by the window. The caption read, "She didn't know he was a billionaire's father. She just saw a man who needed kindness." Within hours, it went viral. Not in the scandalous way the first one had, but like wildfire fueled by something deeper. Compassion. Millions watched, shared, and commented. "More of this, please." This woman is the definition of dignity. I want to be like her when I grow up. The hashtag started trending. Hashtag hidden worth. Alea didn't even have social media. It was a coworker who showed her the post, eyes wide. Girl, you're famous. She didn't feel famous. She felt exposed. Vulnerable. Like the world had peeked behind her curtain without knocking first. But something strange happened next. Reporters showed up, not just local, but national. People wanted interviews. Podcasts reached out. Book agents. Even a streaming service whispered about a potential documentary. And Adam, he never stepped into the spotlight. Not once. He refused interviews, declined comment, and let the story stay where it belonged, with her. 2 days after the restaurant shut down, Alea stood in front of the empty building, holding a paper coffee cup and staring through the dark glass at her old section. Table 14 was gone. Only a faint outline remained where it had stood, like a ghost refusing to leave. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Let me know when you're ready to build something new. AC. She stared at it for a long moment, then tucked the phone back into her coat. Inside her pocket was the check Thomas had written. She hadn't cashed it yet. Not because she didn't need it, but because she couldn't bring herself to close that chapter. Not yet. That night, she walked home slower than usual, thinking not just about the end of something, but the beginning of something else. She'd spent so many years hiding her voice, shrinking herself, smiling through comments, laughing off disrespect. But now, the world had heard her, without her saying a word. And they listened. They saw past the apron, the skin color, the assumptions. They saw the truth. And maybe, just maybe, she was ready to speak. A week passed. Then, another. The buzz around the video began to slow, like all viral moments eventually do. But the change in Alea's life didn't fade. It deepened. Quietly. Steadily. She no longer walked into rooms with her head down. She stood taller, like she finally understood what her mother always meant when she said, "Don't let the world decide your worth." Still, she hadn't made any decisions. She kept the check from Thomas in a drawer next to her journal. Every night before bed, she pulled it out, ran her fingers over the ink, and whispered thank you into the quiet. It wasn't about the money. It was about the man. What he saw in her. What he reminded her to see in herself. And then, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, came the letter. It wasn't a text, or an email, or a voicemail with someone asking for her story. It came by certified mail. A white envelope. Heavy paper. Elegant typeface. Return address, Ether Core HQ, New York City. She opened it slowly, like the contents might be alive. Inside was a single page. Ms. Alea Bennett. On behalf of the Corwin Foundation for Ethical Storytelling, you are formally invited to speak at the annual Voices That Matter Summit in New York City. The foundation was created in honor of Professor Thomas R. Corwin and aims to uplift everyday storytellers who carry humanity in their work. Your presence is not only requested, it is needed. All travel, lodging, and accommodations will be arranged. Sincerely, Adam Corwin, Founder. Alea stared at the letter for a full 5 minutes. Her first thought was, there must be a mistake. Her second, maybe it's a scam. But the watermark on the letterhead was real. The contact info checked out. And tucked inside the envelope was a business-class plane ticket to LaGuardia, hotel confirmation for 3 nights, and a small handwritten note from Adam. My father believed in voices like yours. So do I. Tell your story. We're listening. She sat down on her bed and just cried. Not because she was afraid, but because, for the first time, she wasn't. 2 weeks later, she stepped off the plane and into a different world. New York City in the spring was a sensory overload, horns blaring, street vendors shouting, the smell of roasted peanuts mixed with exhaust fumes. But Alea loved it instantly. She took slow walks through Central Park, ordered 2 sweet lattes from overpriced coffee shops, and let herself feel small in the best possible way. The summit was held in a modern building near the Hudson. Glass walls, natural light, clean lines. There were writers, filmmakers, teachers, nonprofit founders, everyday people who used words to hold the world accountable. And there, standing backstage in borrowed heels and a thrifted blazer that somehow made her feel powerful, was Alea. She had written her speech the night before. It wasn't long. It wasn't polished. But it was hers. When her name was called, she stepped up to the podium. Her voice shook on the first sentence, but not after that. "I never thought a bowl of soup could change my life," she began. Laughter rippled through the room. Gentle. She told them about Marlowe's, about Table 14, about Thomas and his poems, and the way he folded his napkin like it was sacred. She didn't dwell on the hate, or the humiliation, or the manager who couldn't see past her skin. She focused on the moment Thomas looked her in the eye and saw her, not a waitress, not a statistic, but a human being. "I didn't know who he was," she said. "I just knew how he made me feel. Safe. Seen. And that's all any of us really want." The room was quiet when she finished. Then came the applause. Not polite. Not obligatory. Real. She stepped off stage and was met by strangers who weren't strangers anymore. People shook her hand. Hugged her. One woman, a teacher from Chicago, said, "You just reminded me why I started telling stories in the first place." And in the crowd, standing by the exit, was Adam Corwin. He didn't approach. Didn't interrupt. Just gave a nod. A quiet one. A respectful one. She nodded back. That was enough. Later that night, back in her hotel room, Alea opened her journal. She turned to a blank page and wrote 5 words across the top. "I'm not invisible anymore." She didn't know what the next chapter held. But for the first time in a long time, she knew she would be the one writing it. A month after the summit, Alea was back in Savannah. The buzz had died down. The news cycle had moved on, just like it always does. But something inside her hadn't. She was no longer the same woman who quietly clocked in and out of shifts, swallowing her voice just to keep peace. She wasn't louder, just more certain. Her silence now carried weight, and her steps felt anchored in purpose. One afternoon, while sipping tea on her back porch, her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost ignored it. But something told her to answer. "Miss Bennett," the voice said. "Yes. This is Marcus Langley. I'm the program director at Atlantic Writers Institute." Alea straightened in her seat. "We've been following your story. One of our donors mentioned your speech at the Corwin Summit. I was hoping we could talk." A few days later, she met Marcus in a quiet cafe downtown. He was older, black, with kind eyes and a laugh that came easily. He wore reading glasses even when he wasn't reading, and carried a leather-bound notebook that looked older than both of them. "We run a creative writing fellowship," he explained. 4 months. Paid. You write. We publish. We support. You don't have to be polished, you just have to be honest." Alea blinked. "And, you want me?" He smiled. "No. I don't want you. I need you." She was stunned. He continued, "Our fellows usually come from schools like Yale or NYU. But your voice. It's something we can't teach. Your story has blood in it. It breathes. It bruises. It heals." It was the first time someone described her voice like that. They offered her a studio space to write in. A monthly stipend. Full editorial support. No catch. No branding. Just 4 months to put words on paper and the freedom to explore. And first, she hesitated. Not because she wasn't ready, but because it felt unreal. Opportunities like this didn't just fall into people's laps. Especially not people like her. But Marcus saw the hesitation. "You've been waiting your whole life for a door," he said gently. "This is it. Walk through." So she did. Her last night in Savannah, She walked along the riverfront where Marlowe's used to be. The building was under renovation, wrapped in scaffolding and fresh paint. There was no sign of what had once been. But she remembered. She paused for a moment in front of where table 14 had stood, closed her eyes, took a breath. Then she whispered, "Thank you." Not to the building, to the man who changed everything. Her train to Charleston left early the next morning. From there, she'd fly to Boston, where the institute was based. She packed light, just a suitcase and her journal. When she arrived, the studio was small but sunlit. A second-floor walk-up with creaky floors and a big wooden desk. The walls were bare. The air smelled like coffee and old books. It felt right. Every morning, she woke up early, brewed tea, and sat down to write. Not just about Thomas, but about her mother. About the boys in school who mocked her voice. About the woman in the restaurant who filmed her like she was a prop. About everything she'd swallowed for years. And slowly, it started to come together. A manuscript. Part memoir, part essay collection, part poetic protest. She titled it, Hidden Worth. Not just for Thomas, but for every person who had ever been overlooked. The Institute believed in her. They pushed her, respected her boundaries, challenged her assumptions. One day, during a feedback session, Marcus said something that stayed with her. "You don't owe anyone your pain, Alea. But if you choose to share it, do it on your own terms." She wrote that on a sticky note and stuck it to the edge of her mirror. By the third month, publishers started calling. Big ones. Some offered advances that made her dizzy. Others promised exposure, marketing budgets, speaking tours. But she wasn't interested in noise. She wanted truth. And she wanted control. So she signed with an independent publisher that aligned with her values. One that didn't want to change her voice, only amplify it. Her book would be released nationwide by spring. One night, sitting at her desk, Alea looked out the window at the snow-covered street below. Lights flickered in the distance. People passed by, bundled up, lost in their own stories. She smiled. Because for the first time, she knew hers was just beginning. And it mattered. It started with emails. Polite, professional, spaced weeks apart. Adam would occasionally check in after the summit. Brief notes, mostly. Congratulations on the fellowship. A link to an article that reminded him of her speech. A quick, "Hope you're writing." Alea always replied, short and sincere. But over time, the tone changed. Less formal. More curious. He asked her what kind of music she played when she wrote. She asked him if he ever read his father's old poetry aloud. He shared a photo of a coffee shop in Prague with a caption, "You'd love this corner table." They weren't flirting. Not exactly. But something warm was building. A connection neither of them had expected, or planned for. When the fellowship ended, her publisher flew her to New York for final edits and meetings. She arrived on a crisp spring morning, suitcase in one hand, nerves in the other. Before she'd even unpacked, her phone buzzed. "Adam. Dinner." One word. But it carried weight. She said yes. They met at a quiet place on the Lower East Side. Not a scene, not expensive. Just cozy, warm lighting, jazz in the background, the kind of place where conversations linger longer than meals. Adam was different in person this time. Softer around the edges. Less guarded. He wore a charcoal sweater, no tie, no watch, and when he smiled, it didn't feel curated. They talked for hours. About grief. About pressure. About how both of them had grown up with expectations, hers shaped by absence, his by legacy. "You know," he said, stirring his drink, "I used to think power was about money. Then about control. But my father, he was never interested in those things. Not really." Alea listened. "I think the only power he ever wanted," Adam continued, "was to be remembered for being kind." Alea nodded slowly. "And he will be." They walked for blocks afterward, hands in pockets, shoulders brushing but not touching. The city pulsed around them, but their pace was slow, almost reluctant to let the night end. At the hotel, as she reached for the door, Adam hesitated. "Can I say something?" "Of course." He exhaled. "If I weren't my father's son, if this were just two people, no legacy, no past, I'd ask if I could see you again." She smiled, tired but honest. "Then ask." And he did. They didn't rush. There were still walls to lower, lives to untangle. But the foundation had already been poured. Over soup and silence, over grief and poetry, over the one thing neither of them had expected to find again: trust. Because love, when it's real, doesn't enter with fireworks. It arrives like recognition. The glow of accomplishment still clung to Alea like the light after sunset, warm, hopeful, but cracks were beginning to show. The world she had stepped into with sincerity and open heart started revealing edges sharp enough to cut. It began with subtle silences. After the summit, after her speech, people reached out: teachers, writers, activists. Marcus Langley at the Atlantic Writers Institute sent her promo emails, interview requests, all positive. But when the book deal was finalized, certain doors she thought were open quietly shut. Publishers who earlier had praised her work asked to change quotes, sanitize language. Editors requested she downplay her race in marketing materials, or soften references to discrimination. They wanted universal themes, tone down the anger. Agents told her anger sells, but only if it's palatable. Alea refused those changes. She refused to let her voice be rewritten to comfort those who had ignored her for years. But each refusal felt like pushing a heavy door locked from the other side. Then came the criticisms. Not about her writing. Not deeply about Thomas's story. But small things, sideways shots. Too emotional. Overusing his death for gain. Playing the victim. These phrases circulated quietly on social media and in comments under articles. Sometimes from people she recognized, fellow writers, community members. Other times from anonymous accounts. All echoing the same thing: if she was going to share her pain, she should have done it with less mess, with less blood, with less truth. Adam Corwin's name showed up occasionally in debate threads, some praising his humility, others accusing him of grandstanding. Some argued that this whole exposure was more about PR than justice. That he bought the narrative. That Alea was being used. One afternoon, she received a terse message via an editor: "We can't promote the memoir with the current title. It's too provocative." Hidden Worth, the title she chose with sweat and tears, felt threatened. She brushed back tears, closed her laptop, looked out the rain-streaked window. She thought about the nights she spent writing alone, the nights she had no audience, and how this book was her truth. Her relationship with Adam became strained for the first time. They talked on a video call. He complimented the manuscript. He praised her strength. Then gently, hesitating: "Maybe if we adjust the title, drop a few of the more personal chapters." She felt something shift inside. Not anger, exactly, but a sense of losing ground. Losing center. "Not for me," she said. "If I change those parts, it's not my story anymore." There was a pause. He nodded, but she could see disappointment in his eyes. The kind of silence between two people who care but whose roles are fading remembered. Then came the public rift. One of the op-ed writers in a national magazine published a piece accusing Alea of monetizing tragedy. They compared her book to other stories of Black struggle, arguing that her economic gain from publication betrayed the sanctity of grief. Comments flooded beneath the article. Some supportive, others harsh, some cruel. She read them in the cafe where she did most of her writing. A barista recognized her from the summit video, whispered applause: "You're brave." But a stranger at the next table said under his breath, "Here we go again." Alea closed her notebook. She folded her hands, let the noise fall between them. She thought of Thomas, how he never asked for recognition, only acknowledgement. How when she sat across from him, it was always about the human in front of her. That night, she messaged Adam. "Can we talk?" I need to understand what this feels like, when hidden worth is called a product instead of a promise. He answered quickly, yes. Of course. They agreed to meet when she was in New York again. Face to face, no speeches, no audience. When the day came, she arrived at a small rented meeting room in Manhattan. Rain pressed against the windows. Adam was there already, coffee in hand. They sat across a narrow table. I didn't know people would twist your kindness, he said. It wasn't just kindness they twisted, she replied. It was my dignity, too. He nodded. I'm sorry. I thought they saw what I saw. But you're right, some want only what looks pretty. Alea looked down at the manuscript drafts on the table. Chapters crossed out. Some reinstated. She drew a breath. You believed this title, this direction, this voice, she said. I need you to show that belief, not by controlling the frame, but by honoring the frame. There was silence, broken only by the rain tapping on the rooftop. Finally Adam said, You have it. Hidden worth stays. She looked up. It wasn't victory. It wasn't resolution. A rift had opened, but perhaps, in its opening, space was made. Space for Alea's full story. Space for her voice that will not be shrunk to fit someone else's comfort. They left that room changed. Not broken, but brittle. Stronger than she realized, because sometimes love doesn't smooth over problems, it forces you to face the fractures. And Alea? She stepped back into her writing studio the next day, quieter, but more certain. The rift, as painful as it was, made the roof stronger. Where it cracked, she laid beams forged by truth. The fallout didn't end in headlines. It lingered in the spaces between moments. In how people looked at Alea when she entered a room. In how interviews now came with cautious caveats. In how some doors no longer opened with the same ease. But she didn't chase after them. Alea had learned something deeper than vindication, something stronger than applause. She learned that silence, when chosen with intention, is not weakness. It is power refined. She kept writing. In the small studio apartment above a bookstore in Boston's South End, she created a rhythm. Mornings began with black tea and handwritten notes. Afternoons were for editing. Evenings, she walked the quiet side streets lined with brownstones and cracked sidewalks, letting the rhythm of her steps carry her thoughts. She stopped explaining herself. No more justifying the book title. No more shrinking her chapters to fit someone else's comfort zone. No more changing her cadence so that people who had never known struggle could nod along in shallow understanding. She didn't need their nods anymore. The book, Hidden Worth, was released in paperback 3 weeks before summer. It did not top bestseller lists. It didn't make morning TV. But something remarkable happened. It spread. Quietly. Organically. From hand to hand. From teacher to student. From mother to daughter. From mentor to mentee. It showed up in classrooms. In libraries. In prison reading groups. In recovery circles. Alea started receiving letters. Not DMs, not emails, letters. Pages full of shaky handwriting and raw emotion. One was from a high school student in Milwaukee who wrote, I read your book during lunch and cried behind my hoodie. It made me feel like I'm not crazy for feeling invisible. Another from a retired nurse in Arkansas. I spent my life treating people with respect, but no one ever told me it mattered. You told me it did. She read each one. Every word. Every line. And when it felt heavy, because it did, she'd light a candle, sit by the window, and whisper a small thank you into the dark. The press tried to stir the waters again, asking if the book's success was a product of privilege, of timing, of association with a billionaire's son. But by then, those questions felt like mosquitoes trying to bite steel. She didn't answer them, not out of pride, but out of clarity. Her story had already answered everything. Adam, for his part, stayed distant, but not absent. Occasionally he would send her a quote from one of Thomas's old journals. A photo of the finished renovation of the Marlowe's property, now a community creative space called Corwin House. A line from a poem. But there was no pressure. No unfinished business. They had faced the fire. What survived between them was forged, not fabricated. One morning, nearly 6 months after the launch, Alea stood at the front of a small auditorium in Birmingham, Alabama. She'd been invited to speak to a room full of first-generation college students. She wore jeans, sneakers, no makeup, no flash, no script, just her voice. She told them about waiting tables, about folding napkins next to men who called her sweetheart, but never met her eyes, about Thomas, about the soup, about the note, about what it feels like to be underestimated until you're not. I don't need you to be loud, she said, scanning the room. I just need you to be true. Speak even if your voice shakes. Walk in even if the door wasn't made for you. And when they ask who let you in, saying no one did. You belonged there all along. The room was quiet. Not because they weren't moved, but because sometimes silence is the sound of people being changed. Afterward, one of the girls approached her. Yao. Nervous. Braids tucked behind her ears. She didn't say anything at first. Just handed Alea a folded slip of paper and whispered, "Thank you." On it were 5 words. "You made me feel possible." Alea smiled. Not wide. Just quiet. Steady. Because she wasn't chasing big stages or magazine covers anymore. She didn't need to be trending. She didn't need to go viral again. She just needed to keep showing up. Fully. Honestly. Unshakably. And she did. It began with soup. Not a dramatic rescue. Not a grand gesture. Just a quiet bowl of soup and a decision, by one young black waitress, to sit with a lonely old man who everyone else ignored. She didn't do it for recognition. She didn't do it to prove anything. She did it because something inside her, something steady and rooted, refused to look away. And that simple, everyday act sparked a ripple that changed her entire life. It's easy to think life is shaped by the big moments. The job offers. The heartbreaks. The breakthroughs. The stages and the spotlights. But the truth is, it's the ordinary choices, the things we do when no one's watching, that reveal who we are and who we're becoming. For Alea Bennett, that moment at table 14 didn't feel like a turning point. It just felt human. She saw a man who reminded her of her grandfather. She saw tired eyes, a worn coat, trembling hands, and she saw herself, in a way. 2 people, different worlds, but both carrying weight they hadn't asked for. The world around them didn't pause. The customers kept talking. The kitchen clanged. The manager rolled his eyes. But at that table, time slowed. Connection happened. And in that pause, in that pocket of stillness, something powerful began to bloom. Because kindness is not a performance. It's a practice. It doesn't ask for applause. It asks for presence. Thomas didn't tell her who he was. He didn't lead with his last name or his legacy. He led with poetry and pain and a desperate hope that someone might still see him as a whole person. And Alea did. That mattered more than any inheritance ever could. In a world obsessed with networking and image, they built something real. Over shared meals, over quotes scribbled on napkins, over silence that didn't feel awkward. And when he passed, he didn't leave behind wealth. He left a reminder. That dignity isn't something you earn. It's something we owe each other. The impact of that truth echoed far beyond one city, one restaurant, one viral video. It reached classrooms and prisons, hospitals and homes. It reminded people that value isn't always visible, that what we overlook might be where the real worth is hiding. Alea didn't plan to become a symbol. She just chose to stay soft in a world that tried to harden her. She kept writing when it was hard. She stood her ground when her story was questioned. She walked into rooms where she didn't feel welcome and made space by simply existing, fully. And in doing so, she showed us something rare. That the most powerful stories are not the loudest. They're the ones that linger. The ones that whisper, "You are not alone." There's a lesson in all this for every one of us. You don't have to be wealthy to be generous. You don't have to be famous to matter. You don't need millions of followers to make a difference. You just need to show up, with empathy, with honesty, with eyes that are willing to truly see. And when you do, you change things. Maybe not for the whole world, but for someone's world. Just like Alea did for Thomas. Just like Thomas did for her. So the next time you pass someone who's being overlooked, ignored, discarded, pause. The next time you hear a voice shaking from years of being silenced, listen. The next time you have the chance to act with compassion, even when no one's watching, take it. Because that one moment, that one decision, might become the story someone carries with them forever. And maybe that's the real legacy we leave behind. Not our titles. Not our resumes. But our humanity. So here's a quiet invitation from the heart of this story, from Alea's journey to yours. Live like you believe people matter. Love like it's the only language that still works. And speak even if your voice shakes. Because someone out there is waiting for a story like yours. If this story moved you, inspired you, or simply reminded you of what still matters, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Pass it on. Subscribe to Hidden Worth for more real stories that celebrate unseen courage and unexpected connection. You never know who might need to hear it today. Remember, it all started with a bowl of soup and a choice to care. What will your moment be?